Serious therapists of Reddit, has a patient ever shared something that was either too much or caused you to question your own life? If so, what was it? I volunteer at a suicide hotline. I'm not a registered therapist, but I have some formal training that a therapist might employ on a regular basis. Namely, tools and strategies to empathize, listen, make people feel heard, and carry out risk assessments to gauge whether an individual is at risk for a suicide attempt. Generally, I don't regard anything as oversharing. However, there are men who frequently abuse the service for sexual pleasure. They get off on sharing their fetishes with women. I'd say our hotline is about 80% women, and some people take advantage of that. They don't outright share, they disguise it. I'm depressed that my wife is going to leave me. It's all my fault. I hate myself, what's the point of living? Well, tell me what you mean. Well, you see, it's very private. It's hard to talk about. Very normal when talking about something that stresses you out to the point of taking your life. You work on building trust and rapport, and then they come out with some outlandish sexual fetish like being fucked with eels, incest scenarios. The response is just to explain that we don't talk about sexual matters in depth like this. Recommend seeing a therapist or counselor and then drop the call. Men who are obsessed with sex are annoying to begin with. But then you call a frigging suicide hotline where people get put on hold because we don't have enough volunteers. Men who are obsessed with sex are annoying to begin with. But then you call a frigging suicide hotline where people get put on hold because we don't have enough volunteers, and you just want to call us to jerk off. I started volunteering specifically because I found out that there are hold times. Isn't that terrible? Someone who is suicidal should immediately be connected to a caring and trained individual. We do the best we can, but we definitely need more people. I have no patience for these jerks anymore. Sometimes I disconnect without so much as providing an explanation. How utterly pathetic and selfish. You'd rather indulge in your fetish than allow someone suicidal to get connected with the help they need. I don't know how relevant this is, but I started doing couples counseling with my ex about a year and a half before we finally split up. One of our big issues was that my partner was undergoing a gender transition, MTF, and as a pretty straight woman, I was really struggling with suddenly being in a lesbian relationship. But every time I expressed discomfort or sadness or anything other than pure unadulterated joy about the situation, my partner would call me a TERF and say I was making too big a deal of her transition. I intentionally found us a couples counselor who specialized in gender transition and was themselves non-binary, because I have been in individual therapy since the dawn of time and knew how to be pretty comfortable with anyone, but I knew my partner was going to have a more difficult time with it. So I wanted to find someone who would understand the transition issue and not make her feel judged. It backfired on me so bad. Our counselor was an intern still and fairly inexperienced. They wound up way over-identifying with my ex and joined in on calling me a TERF during sessions. In every session, if my partner so much as raised her eyebrows, the counselor would zero in on her and be all, "You had a reaction just then. What's going on? What are you feeling?" Meanwhile, I would be openly sobbing and completely ignored. It escalated to the point where I would be in sessions talking about how I was scared of my partner, scared of being yelled at. She yelled at me a lot and felt unsafe, and the counselor actually said, "I'm struggling to have compassion for you because it's very emotionally abusive of you to say that your partner makes you feel unsafe." I went back for one more session just to tell the therapist how absolutely horrible and incompetent they had been, and refused to go back again. My partner and I had pretty much decided to split anyway, so what's the use in paying someone $90 a week to tell me that I'm abusive for seeking help trying to cope with my abusive narcissistic ex? God, it was awful. There is nothing more haunting than hearing someone say they're thinking of killing themselves when they're being 100% serious. I was in the ER with my mom around 15 years ago. A guy in the curtained off area beside us was telling the doctor he was going to kill himself, but decided to come to the ER for help instead. The way he said it was just so factual and real. When we left, my mom just walked up to him and gave him a hug. She didn't say a word, nor did the guy. Then we left. I got out of the therapy game a decade ago, but I used to work with abused, neglected children and their families. I had a father of a sexually abused little girl that was contemplating doing something serious to the offender. I talked him down and let him come to his own realizations about the consequences of those actions. However, it made me think. What would I do in his situation? Could I control myself? Also, hearing how many of the mom's live-in boyfriends would abuse the children was pushing me towards taking one of them out behind the shed. Hearing those kids' stories was beginning to affect me after I had my own kids just too much. So I changed careers. Still helping people, just in a different way. Therapist here. I do a lot of mental health assessments, evaluations rather than long-term therapy. I can't get too specific, but I used to contract for CPS in my state to do evaluations with kids and later moved to a different work setting. Well, one day a year or two later, a woman came in for an evaluation and told me a pretty normal trying to get my life back in order story, but one thing stuck out, that she had caused the death of her child. As we're talking, I realized that I knew who that kid was because of my previous job and had worked with him a few times. I'm glad I didn't make the connection until late in the evaluation, because it definitely threw a wrench me emotionally. I ended up referring the woman out to a different provider afterwards. I'm a patient, but my therapist and I recently went through the start of my childhood trauma, and she said so softly, "Oh my God, you were tortured." I don't think she even meant for me to hear. I'm the patient, but at some point during my most severe depressive episode, one mentioned something pretty offhand like it was totally normal, and it made my therapist go, oof. I honestly can't remember exactly what, but I know it was something to do with my low self-esteem at the time. I think just something like, just constantly thinking about how ugly you are, and then the rest of the sentence. I know it sounds hyperbolic, but it wasn't for me at the time, and I think the tone of voice, how casual it was, made that clear. She always made a point of complimenting like my shirt or whatever after that, and I could see it really took her aback. VE just transitioned to working with older clients. The number of men I meet who just give up because there's nothing left in their lives after the spouses die, or who become unwell and feel like they're a burden, or who just don't see the point of living once they can't work anymore is ridiculous. It's what pushed me to try and get involved with men's rights, despite how much of a minefield it is. We have to stop treating men the way we do, because the long-term effects of being treated like an economic vending machine and a socio-cultural punching bag is appalling. These men have a deep-seated belief that if they aren't sacrificing themselves for everyone around them, they literally don't deserve to be alive. It's some real grim shit. So to get a master's in mental health counseling, I had to do a stint as a free intern doing therapy for people without insurance. On my first day, my first client told me she had nothing to live for, no will to live, and everyone in her family had already committed suicide, so she wanted to as well. I sat there like WTF! Exclamation mark. Where do I even start? So I called in my supervisor and he showed me how to assess if a client is a danger to themselves or others. For the rest of my time working with her, suicide was all she would talk about. The clinic director finally told me that she was no longer allowed to have therapy unless she agreed to move on past her obsession with suicide, because it was very unhealthy and she wasn't getting anywhere by talking about it every damn week. Then, my second client on my first day of internship was a man who drank 3 bottles of vodka a day to maintain normal status. He tried rehab for years and insisted that he was fine and functioning so long as he had his 3 bottles. Next day, I get a client who is a complete mess. She had lost her kids and had no motivation to do anything anymore. She had no job, no future, no motivation to change that, and spent most of her days just staring into space, hating her life. Needless to say, I didn't last at that internship and switched to getting a PhD in metaphysics and applied psychology. Needless to say, I didn't last at that internship and switched to getting a PhD in metaphysics and applied psychology instead. Cannot handle that kind of job! Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. Edit. More to say, I will say that I tried my best to stick it out, but client after client kept coming, all with the same hopelessness. In that same year, I got robbed twice with all my possessions stolen, got back on my feet just to have it happen again. So I had a lot to deal with in my own life, and trying to talk others into having hope wasn't possible when my own life was so out of control. Being an unpaid intern, I couldn't afford to live in a safe neighborhood. But I lasted until like a month before I was supposed to be done, when shit really hit the fan for me and I fled the state, never to look back. I got in huge trouble with the ethics committee for not closing out with my clients and abandoning my position, but yeah, couldn't even begin to help. I will say that there were clients who I think I was able to connect with and help. Just a few, but better than nothing. I'm not a therapist, but I am a patient and I've got some pretty serious shit on my back. Real traumatizing shit. I won't get into it for privacy reasons. I can't remember what the hell I was going off about in a session once, but it was enough to make my therapist cry. She had to get herself a tissue cause she had tears down her face. But there was another time I had a really bad suicidal episode. I had made plans to kill myself and even put a gun in my mouth to see how it fits so I could practice for the next week. I reached out to a friend to watch me for the time and we worked together so I was okay. Well, the next time I saw my therapist, I told her about what had happened and she decided to help me by writing down a list of things worth living for, and I cannot express how much worse it made the situation. It was the shortest goddamn list I've ever seen in my life. She tried thinking of things to add, but she was struggling so hard to think of things to suggest that the list ended up having some bullshit stuff on it. Things that don't really matter that much to me nor would save my life if I thought about them during a suicidal episode. But don't worry, I've started medication and I feel a lot better. I had an adolescent client whose friend had just been murdered while the client was in residential treatment. The client was neither sad nor mad, just calmly told me he knew who did it and was going to kill them as soon as he got out. What made me question was the fact that I could completely understand his decision. This kid wasn't a bad kid. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. If you are a therapist, please comment your experiences below.